G'day everybody, and welcome to Product Tank. Sorry for the slight delay. We had a little bit of a technical glitch, which, as most of you know, that just means an end user failure. So my bad for starting a little bit late. But let's get started. So welcome to Product Tank Sydney. Product Tank Sydney, I hope you've been to a Product Tank event before. We are just one of 200 sort of global little meetup communities around the world. And we're by product people for product people. So I'm a product person. Anshul, who presents, is a product person, and pretty much everyone running these things is a product person. Now, Product Tank, these are the little communities, and we are connected to Mind the Product, which is a global professional network for product people. Mind the Product has a blog, which has lots and lots of fantastic content, and you can get involved in that as well. More on that in a second. And our mission ultimately is to make product people more successful by coming together and furthering our craft. And so the way Product Tank started is that a bunch of product managers in London, I'm lucky to know a couple of them, they met in a pub and discussed product management and realized that, hey, they actually are experiencing sort of similar challenges, different companies, different products, but still experience similar challenges, and talking about that with other people helped them a lot and learning from each other. So without further ado, we will do a quick acknowledgement of country. If you're not from Australia and you don't know what this is, look into Australian history. Very interesting, and some lessons there on how to probably not treat people. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Product Tank Sydney acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Now we will shortly head into our talk with Anshul. But first of all, we're a community. So that means you can get involved. You can either speak at Product Tank, you can host a Product Tank or sponsor a Product Tank event. Probably more next year. We'll try to do in-person events when, depending on the COVID situation. You can write for Mind the Product, and you can do all sorts of other wonderful things. So get in touch. From my experience, pretty much everyone who works in product or even adjacent to product has something to offer. All our experiences and jobs and companies and everything are all a little bit different, but we all have something that we can teach others and that other people can learn from. So let's bring that out and allow us all to take the next step forward in our craft, in our careers, in the way we think about the world. Before we head into the talk, also quickly, obviously, this is a remote event. Familiarize yourself with the fire exits and toilets wherever you are. I want you to still be safe. And quick profile on me, so you know who's hosting these things. I'm Benjamin Wirtz. I'm a scale-up product leader. I spent my career building a couple of companies myself, and then ended up working with fast-growing companies from Atlassian to Google to, in a few years as a consultant, I worked with probably around 50 organizations around Sydney and a few hundred product people. And what I had to do, throughout this time and still, is just always learn. And so this is what Anshul's talk is about. And so this is one that's really close to my heart. Learning how to learn as a product manager, right? Where do you even start? You sit between the business and the customer and the designers and the technology side. And so you can spend an infinite amount of time and still not be an expert in all three of those things, and probably shouldn't be. But the question is, when you set out on this journey of learning and becoming better, where do you start? What's relevant for your current role? What's relevant for your next role? And so Anshul has a really cool way of thinking about that. And so I've known Anshul for a while, and he's generally a very insightful guy, and also thinks deeply about stuff. And so his background is having founded 3 companies himself, but also being a former product leader at freelancer.com and Amazon. So lots of good content ahead, and without any further delays, it's over to Anshul now. So Anshul, take it away. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Hi, everyone. As Ben said, I'm here to talk about learning how to learn in the context of being a product manager. Before I get into it, I wanted to share a quick story. So some of you might remember this. For those of you who don't, this is an old, I don't know if it's still around, but online RPG game called RuneScape. And I used to play a lot of RuneScape when I was a kid. I'd come home from school every day and I'd play, and I'd wake up in the morning and play with people in the US. And basically you have this virtual character online, and it's got different skills like chopping wood and fighting monsters and fishing, a number of different things, and you level up with the skills and you get better and better over time, and you can fight bigger and better monsters. Anyway, so I used to play a lot of RuneScape, and one day I came home from school, as usual. I drop my bag on the floor, I sit down, I start playing, I log on, and there's something not quite right. I go chop the wood, I go fight the monsters, and it's not quite hitting the spot. And chalk it up to sleep deprivation and log off and do some homework for once, and figure I'll try again in the morning. So wake up in the morning, log on again, and still something not quite right. So I go to school slightly worried that there's something wrong with me, and I spend the day kind of pondering what's wrong. And I come home the same day and I sit down to play again, and I kind of realize what's bothering me. I've got this question in the back of my mind, which is, what's the point? Why am I doing all this? I'm leveling up this virtual character and acquiring like virtual weapons, and none of this is going to be useful to me in 10 years. And as soon as I had that question in my mind, it actually made it super hard for me to play. So I gave it a go for like another half hour and then logged off and never played again. And understandably, this left a big void in my life. I was playing after school and before school, and I wasn't about to begin filling that time with homework. So, I spent a little bit of time pondering, what it could be. And, I figured I'd try and teach myself how to program. So, I like computers, I like building things, I like tech. Seemed like a useful skill, better than leveling up my virtual character. Maybe I'd give that a go. And so I started doing the same thing. I'd come home from school every day, and I'd learn how to program, and I'd do it in the mornings, and it actually worked out pretty well. Definitely a useful skill. I got better and better at it over time. People started paying me to build them websites and apps. Eventually, I got a real job doing it. And I kind of patted myself on the back, and I was like, "Oh, good choice." RuneScape wasn't the one, but programming, this is it. Until one day I sit down, I come into work and I sit down and I start typing code, and there's something wrong. And type some more code. I go out, I get a coffee, I come back. There's still something wrong, and I chalk it up to sleep deprivation. Come back the day after, sit down again, and it's the same thing. But I've had this feeling before, so I kind of pick up on it a bit quicker. And I realize I've got the same question in my mind. What's the point? Why am I programming? Why am I doing this? Which is weird, right? Because I'm getting paid to do it. I'm creating value for customers. It seems like a pretty useful skill. And as I think about it harder, I realize there's a problem. Even though programming itself is going to be useful to me in 10 years, every damn month there's a new framework, a new language, a new technology. I'm spending a lot of my time learning things that actually won't be useful in 10 years. And it's actually a huge pain to keep up. And this realization kind of led me to an even bigger question. What should I learn? If it's not RuneScape and it's not, programming languages and frameworks, then, what is it? What should I really be learning? And that's what I want to talk about today. Why is learning important? What should we focus on learning? And how do we optimize the process of actually learning? This talk isn't specifically relevant to product management. Like, you can really apply these concepts and principles anywhere, but I'm going to use examples from my career as a product manager. And I think it is especially relevant to, I guess, what you could call a bit of an ambiguous role like product management. It's also not a talk on how to learn specific skills. It's more a talk on meta learning, if you will, the how to think about learning as an overarching skill. Cool. So I think a good place to start is, why is learning important? As a product manager, I think most of your job is solving problems, and I think learning as a product manager is basically solving problems better, right? Learning helps us solve problems better. And what does better look like? Well, it means solving more types of problems. solving problems more easily, and solving problems more quickly. And that's what I'm going to walk through one by one. So to start off with, what should you learn if you want to solve more types of problems? So a few years ago, I started making a to-learn list, and this is a few screenshots, incomplete, but part of the list that I still have in my Notion today. And basically what I do is every few months I'd come across something on the internet that looked nice, that I was interested in learning, and then I'd put it on my list. And I was pretty good about it for a while. I would sit down at the beginning of every month or every 2 months, however long a particular thing took to learn, and I'd pick something off my list, and then I'd work my way through it. I'd watch videos, do exercises, maybe build a small project depending on what it was, and I'd feel like I'd learned something new. I'd feel pretty accomplished. And I did this for a while, maybe 6 months to a year. But eventually what I realized was, after the fourth or fifth thing which I'd learned, I'd actually forgotten most of what I'd learned at the beginning. And this was largely due to the fact that I wasn't really applying it in my day-to-day life, and it wasn't something that I actually used a lot. And this is a really, I guess, general problem when you're thinking about what to learn. Like, most of the things you learn won't be useful in 10 years from now, right? Like, the space of things that will be useful for you in 10 years is actually very, very small. And given that, how do you decide what skills are the most valuable ones to learn? So the way I think about this is by asking the question, how many types of problems is this skill relevant to? And you can break it down into two broad buckets: high leverage skills, which are relevant to many types of problems, and low leverage skills, which are relevant to only a few types of problems. So for example, sales, communication, systems thinking, decision-making, they're all high leverage. They're relevant in a lot of different contexts to a lot of different types of problems. Whereas, things like a specific technology, like, one individual programming language, versus the skill of actually programming, or, a very specific company process, is quite low leverage. You can't really take that anywhere else. And so the solution here is really to focus on learning skills that are relevant to many types of problems. High leverage skills are more valuable in the sense that there is more market demand for them than there is supply. They're harder to automate, because machines and computers are very good at doing, narrow, constrained, domain-specific tasks, whereas, high leverage skills by definition are, broad and cross-domain, and they're more difficult to acquire because they're the types of things you can often only get good at through, repeated exposure and experience, as opposed to, studying them at school or university or from a textbook. So, if you think about learning in your career as an example, you can break down what you learn into three broad buckets: company-specific knowledge, so things which you're learning which are only useful when solving problems at that particular company. Stuff like, the org chart, specific internal processes, systems or tools that are only used at that place. Then you've got domain-specific knowledge, so stuff which is only useful when solving problems within that particular industry. So for example, if you move between supply chain and e-com, a lot of the knowledge you have is going to be transferable because you're staying roughly within the same domain. So that compounds, and that's useful between the different contexts. But then you've got skill-specific knowledge, and this is transferable across, all companies, all domains. Stuff like decision-making, management, influencing. Really, like, no matter what company, industry, role, level you go to, those skills are really, really useful and applicable. So, given this framework, what should you think about optimizing for? And there's no real right answer here. Like, it really depends on what your strategy is. Like, if you want to stay at a particular company and climb the corporate ladder and spend 20 years there, then that company-specific knowledge is going to be really useful for you. It's going to be useful in 10 years. It's going to be useful in 20 years. And it's going to make you, a really good operator within that environment. Same thing for a particular domain. If you want to stay in retail or e-commerce or supply chain for the rest of your life, acquiring a lot of that knowledge and a lot of those skills is going to be really relevant for you long term. But if you want optionality, if you want, to pick up a set of skills where you can take them to any context, any company, industry, or level, which is often what happens in product, then you often want to, you get the best ROI from spending your time on skill-specific knowledge, the things which are really, really transferable. And this framework, leads to, once you start thinking this way, you can draw a number of interesting conclusions. So for example, if you spend time at big companies, you're going to spend more time on low leverage skills, because the larger a company is, the more of what you're learning there is only relevant and useful within that company, because larger companies have more specific process and hierarchy and politics and things like that. And then people skills, for example, they often tend to be very high leverage. Communication, sales, influencing. People are basically everywhere you go. And so, the better you get at people skills, the better you're going to be able to operate no matter what environment you're in. Another one's abstract thinking skills, right? They're super high leverage. If you think about counting, for example, counting is probably, one of the most high leverage skills anybody learns in their entire life. So what should you learn if you want to solve more types of problems? One, focus your time on high leverage skills as much as possible, unless, of course, you plan to stay in that domain or that company for a very long time. Ask yourself, will this skill be useful in 10 years? And ask yourself, how many types of problems is this particular skill or is this knowledge relevant to? Right, so that was solving more types of problems. What about solving problems more easily? So a lot of product people will often ask me, if they should learn how to program. It's a really common question, and they'll often imagine, it'll look something like this. In reality, it looks something like this. In fact, my housemate is learning how to program at the moment, and he spends most of his time looking a lot worse than this. And the issue is really that programming involves a lot of problem solving, and solving problems takes time and energy. And we have limited time and we have limited energy. We want problem solving to be fast and effortless. So how do we do that? And the essence of how I think about this is when skills become habits, they become effortless. So a lot of you have probably seen something like this before, System 1 and System 2 thinking. But for those of you who haven't, the high level ideas, most of your processing and most of your reactions come from this fast, intuitive System 1. And, we call it different things like, muscle memory or habits or subconscious. But it's basically like if I say 2 times 2, you think 4 because you memorized your times tables when you're a kid. Or if I throw you a ball, you probably catch it without thinking. Whereas, if I say 32 times 78, you have to go check with System 2, and System 2 has to do the math, and then it reports the number back, and it takes a lot longer and it's a lot more effort. But if you answer that question enough times, eventually System 1 will just cache that or remember it, and it'll become intuitive and automatic. And so the solution to making problem solving easy is basically turning skills into habits. The key to mastering a skill is basically to learn it in layers and only progress to the next layer when the previous ones become a habit. So what do I mean by that? As a product manager, chances are at some point you're going to have to analyze data. And depending on the product you're working on or the company you're at, you're going to have different tools, right? It might be Excel, it might be Mixpanel, it might be Tableau. You're probably going to have to write SQL at some point. There's a lot of different things to keep track of. And whenever you move to a new company or a new product, it's actually quite a pain and takes quite a while to figure out how to get the data you need. And that's because for the first few weeks or couple of months, each time you're trying to get answer to a data question, you're trying to do 3 things at once. You're trying to figure out how the tool works. How do I, combine data sources? How do I visualize data? How do I aggregate it? You're trying to figure out how the data works. Where does different pieces of data live? How do I combine them? Why are there weird anomalies? Why are there 2 columns that kind of have a similar thing, but not exactly? And then finally, you're also trying to think about the actual data problem you're trying to solve. But what happens over time is, as you spend more and more time with the tools, it becomes muscle memory, it becomes habit. And same thing with the data. You spend more time with the data and you start to intuitively know, where different things live. And as you do this, as, the foundational layers become System 1 and habitual for you, it frees up more of your conscious mind to think about the problem you're trying to solve, which is where you want your System 2 to really focus. And the really interesting conclusion here is that habits buy you mental leverage. The more skills you can turn into habits, the higher your capacity for output is going to be. You hear a lot that you can't multitask, but it's not strictly true. You can't multitask with System 2. You can't do two things at once with your conscious mind, but you can do many things with System 1. And so when things become habits, you can actually begin to multitask with them, right? Like I can drive from point A to point B on a route which I'm familiar with without really thinking too hard about it and having a conversation the entire time, which my System 2 is occupied with. Same thing with brushing my teeth. I can brush my teeth and be occupied with something else and get to the end of it and barely even remember that I brushed my teeth, because that was operating on a subconscious habitual level, and my System 2 was fully occupied with some higher level task. So what should you learn if you want to solve problems more easily? Well, one, focus on turning skills into habits. Ask yourself, what are the different layers in the skill? And then ask yourself which ones of these layers are habits for you now. And then work your way up from the bottom to fill in the gaps. And you basically drill each of those layers, same way you would in sport or by doing exercises in an academic environment, until it becomes intuitive and habitual. Awesome. So we've done how to solve more types of problems and how to solve problems more easily. What about solving problems more quickly? So when I was working at freelancer.com, I came into work one day and we had this security issue. Basically, one of our competitors, Elance, had their database leaked, and their database contained a lot of the users who also used freelancer.com with the same email and password combinations, which meant now that it had been leaked, people or malicious users and hackers could begin trying to log into freelancer.com using the email password combinations from Elance. And this was an issue. So basically, we came in and we knew many accounts were compromised, and we knew people were trying to transfer money out of the compromised accounts. And the piece of information we didn't know, which we wish we knew, was which accounts are compromised. And the decision we're really trying to make is, should we lock all of the accounts, lock all of them down, or try to find out the ones that are compromised and only lock those ones? If we lock down all of the accounts, we disrupt the flow of a lot of users. We probably put a dent in revenue, but we also guarantee security. Whereas if we can quickly figure out which accounts are compromised, we can have the best of both worlds. And the abstract version of this is basically most important problems have many variables and not enough information. And this is pretty much true in all aspects of life. And so how do we make fast, accurate decisions when we don't have enough data? What should we learn to basically cultivate that skill? And if you think about it, most of these decisions are actually speed versus accuracy trade-offs. You could, if you had the resources and the time, spend a lot of time gathering more information and data and come to like a really informed, accurate decision. The issue is most of the time we want to be able to make those decisions quickly. In this particular case, the one I'm describing with the security incident, we didn't have the luxury of waiting to see, to gather all the necessary information before deciding. And the solution to these dilemmas is basically what are called heuristics. And the heuristics are rules of thumb. So they're mostly right, but they're not always right. But they help kind of constrain the problem and give you a directionally good answer very, very quickly. So I'm going to walk you through a few different heuristics that I like to use. This is a very deep rabbit hole. There's lots of different frameworks and mental models, but I'll walk you through three which I like. So here you can see what is called a decision matrix. This is something I found on Google Images, and it's basically somebody deciding where they should move. They've got a few options: Portland, Los Angeles, New York, San Diego, Minneapolis, and they're evaluating them against a few different criteria. Weather, are there family and friends nearby, cost of living, job availability, proximity to urban amenities. And they give each one a score out of 3, and then they aggregate the score into a final score, and presumably you make the choice, in this case, New York City, which has the best score. Now, the problem with this approach is, I mean, first of all, there's a huge band for each of these, right? Like we're giving each one a score out of 3. So already, is a 3 a high 3 or a low 3? You've already basically introduced an error margin of 33%. On top of that, I mean, either one, you have to go out and collect data to do a really informed analysis here, or you have to go out and, I mean, if you try to do it more intuitively, there's a good chance your error margin is even worse. And the problem is, once you aggregate all of these up into a final score, you're compounding that error margin. So the final score, even though it looks, very singular and certain, it's actually incredibly high error and high variance, and you probably shouldn't trust it at all. And when making decisions like this, another way to approach it is actually just to think about what the single most important thing is. And usually you can identify what that is. And if you can identify it, it actually gives you a lot of clarity in making the decision. You can eliminate a lot of variables, and usually you don't even have to gather that much more information. You can just make the decision on the spot because you know what's the most important thing, and you often have enough information to make it. So if we go back to the example I'm talking about, the trade-off we're trying to make is, should we lock down all of the accounts now, or should we wait a bit longer and try to figure out which accounts are compromised and just lock down those ones? And in this particular case, the single most important thing for us is minimizing fraudulent transactions because they're incredibly painful to kind of claw back and deal with, and you lose trust with a lot of customers. And so if you think about that, then it becomes very clear which decision to make immediately. Another one I really like is one-way versus two-way doors. So you might have heard of this from Jeff Bezos. And the gist of it is you want to move fast on easily reversible decisions. So the 2x2 here is, a spectrum of reversible to irreversible and consequential to inconsequential. And in the top right, we've got easily reversible decisions that are low impact or inconsequential. And obviously you want to make those really, really quickly because, even if you make them wrong, you can reverse them. And, if things go wrong, there's low impact, as opposed to the bottom left, which is high impact and irreversible, where you want to pause and take a long time and think really, really carefully. And the mistake that most people make is they spend too long analyzing decisions which are either easily reversible or inconsequential. So going back to my example again, we're trying to decide, should we lock down all of the accounts, or just wait a little bit, try to gather more data, figure out which ones are compromised, and lock down those ones. Now, one of those decisions, waiting and basically allowing more fraudulent transactions to occur in the meantime, is a fairly irreversible decision that's also quite high impact. It's in the bottom left quadrant. Whereas locking all of the accounts is actually top right. We can very quickly unlock them, and at the end of the day, the impact is not so high. So it becomes quite clear again which decision we should make here. And the last one I want to talk about is asymmetric risk. And so what you want to do is you want to make bets that have a capped downside and an uncapped upside. And if we think about my example again, a capped downside is basically, there's a smallish fixed amount that you're going to lose if things go wrong. Whereas if things go right, you basically gain almost a very large amount or an unlimited amount. So back to my example, the two options of, locking everything or waiting. Waiting is basically uncapped downside. The fraudulent transactions occurring are very difficult to reverse. We don't know if we can get the money back. We lose the trust of a lot of customers who may or may not return in the future. Whereas the upside of it is actually quite limited. If we wait around in the hopes of saving, 1 or 2 days of project revenue, that's actually a smallish fixed amount that we don't care a great deal about, in contrast to the amount we might lose. So kind of going back to what we're solving here, we want to be able to solve problems quickly and easily. And the solution to this is building an arsenal of useful heuristics, like the 3 which I just shared. Heuristics are basically a fast, easy way to solve problems that are usually, but not always, accurate. And you want to use heuristics to balance speed versus accuracy trade-offs. So if you go back to the 2x2, in the case where speed doesn't matter so much, spend your time, think about the decision, gather the data. But a lot of the time you want to be able to move quickly, especially as a product manager thinking on your feet with different trade-offs to make every day. The examples I shared just then are single biggest factor, one-way versus two-way doors, and asymmetric bets. But if you Google, you'll be able to find a lot of other content and frameworks you can use. And that's pretty much it. So quick recap. We want to learn as product managers because learning helps us solve problems better. Better basically means solving more problems, and solving more problems comes down to learning skills that are relevant to many types of problems. And ask yourself, will this be useful in 10 years? We also want to solve problems more easily with less mental effort and cognitive load. And to do this, we want to focus on turning skills into habits. And to do this, you want to ask, what are the different layers to the skill? And then you want to focus on building up those layers as habits. And finally, you want to solve problems quickly. And to do that, you want to build an arsenal of useful heuristics and almost make those habits as well. And in this case, you just want to ask yourself in a given situation, what are the heuristics that I can apply here? And that's it from me. Thanks, everyone. Any questions?
Awesome. Give Anshul a big hand, even if you can't hear you. That was awesome. That was really, really cool. Anshul, thank you so much for sharing. And especially the frameworks at the end I use myself, but it never gets boring to sort of hear it again. Which decisions are reversible, and what is actually the potential downside and upside on something. So yeah, awesome. Now, everyone in the audience, put your questions just into the chat. We'll go through them one by one. We already have one from Clint, but I hope you don't mind. I'll have to ask one question first, which is, well, through all the learning that you've done in your career now from startups and from having worked at some amazing companies, what do you feel like is the most valuable thing that you've learned that has sort of gone through? That has just turned out to be valuable again and again.
The single most valuable thing? It's a tough question. I would say it's probably. Sorry?
You can go for a top 3 if that makes it easier.
Yeah, I would probably say, like, over time, the thing which you learn is, like, everything kind of turns into people. Like, if you want to get anything done, it just comes down to people. And so the big bucket of skills you want to get really good at, that is the highest leverage, is people in various contexts, right? Like, you want to basically build trust with people really easily and effectively. You want to be able to influence people, not in a manipulative way, but in a kind of way where they, they'll come along with you for whatever journey they need to go on. And yeah, I think that's probably the big bucket of things, and then there's a lot of different small ones within that.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's right. I think especially in product, right? It's often understood, especially in Australia still, as an execution role, when really I see it as a leadership role and as a strategy role. And what I always expect from my product managers is that they are leaders and they think of themselves as leaders and not just the people, like priorities and stuff in the backlog, thinking about a strategy, but ultimately, taking the whole team on a journey as well, which is easily said and very easier said than done, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I have to ask now about a couple of other things. Amazon and Freelancer, both well-known companies, but from everything I hear, also work quite differently. So asking specifically sort of about the core PM skill set, what did you find sort of most transferable between those two places?
Yeah. So that transition was super interesting for me, right? Because I went from basically a 300-person company to like a 800,000-person company. And if you think about like so Freelancer was a very typical kind of tech company, product squads. As a PM, you were managing, a team of engineers, a designer, a data scientist a lot of the time. And then at Amazon, it was actually super different because, I mean, in our particular scenario, we were quite far removed from the engineering teams, and there were a lot more layers between us and engineering. So it almost turned into a very commercial kind of consulting role. And I think, a lot of the, I guess, being closer to the engineering and the tech and the actual ground level product from Freelancer was definitely very helpful, but it wasn't the primary skill that I used at Amazon anymore. And it kind of became more of the, I was working on the marketplace, but, things around the marketplace experience, how to incentivize the right kinds of behaviors, and really just kind of like that customer focused mindset of, what are the problems we're solving here? What's the best solution for them? Things like that. I think those were probably the most transferable, and a lot of the day-to-day actually changed quite a lot.
Yeah, interesting. It's fascinating how you mentioned the customer focus. I found whether I was in a startup or whether I was like at any other product organization, no matter what stage, understanding the customer is really important, right? But as you mentioned, sort of the domain-specific skills about the needs of a customer in any specific domain, that changes. But really good customer research skills, whether it's qualitative or analytics skills, that remains the same. And so that's actually a core skill set that when you invest in that, it makes it so much easier as a PM to get started in any industry and in any product that you end up working on down the line.
Yeah,
that's what I found really important. Was there anything else that you found was very well transferable between like being a founder as a startup, where you essentially wear the product hat, and then being a product manager in a large organization, because you get a different stage, you have so many more stakeholders to manage. What did you find was sort of similar between those?
I might actually have the same answer. I think the thing about starting a startup from scratch is, especially if you don't have any kind of product market fit, is you are taught that lesson of like figure out what the customer's problems are in like the most brutal way possible. Like you will bang your head against the wall and talk to hundreds of different customers until you find some thread of actual demand, right? And you're some tiny 1, 2, 3 person team. Nobody's really going to buy your product until you're actually genuinely solving a problem for them, a problem that is burning enough that they will trust a very average MVP product to solve it for them. And so I think taking that lesson back into a more kind of established environment is super, super valuable, because it helps you generate the right hypotheses for what to build really quickly. And basically, as a product manager, your entire job is making the right bets. What should we be building?
Awesome. Okay, so now we've got a couple of questions from the audience, and I encourage everyone who's on jot down a few more. Let's make the most out of Anshul while we have it. And hi, by the way, to Nigeria and the UK and all sorts of other amazing places you guys are joining us from. Okay, so this question is from Clint, which is about how you know when to like learning a certain skill is important, and whether you can like decide at any certain point in time whether you like why you really need to learn it, and if you can delegate it as well. Great question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think there's kind of two levels to this, right? Like in your day-to-day, there's more kind of technical skills you could learn. For example, at a point in time, my data scientist, a freelancer, took leave, and then there was data science work to do, and so I learned a lot of the tools and the actual concepts behind it, so I could do it. And that was more of a curiosity thing. But in reality, that wasn't probably the highest or best leverage use of my time. I definitely could have delegated that. And chances are in 10 years, I'm not going to remember much of it. So in general, I try to optimize for things which will compound over long periods of time. If I'm going to be using a skill in 10 years, chances are I'm going to use it for a long period of time over those 10 years, and I'm going to get really, really good at it at the end of those 10 years. So that's what I tend to bias towards. Now, that being said, in your day-to-day, depending on your role, you are just going to have to learn some other skills, right? Like you're just going to have to learn how to use Tableau or Excel or whatever it is. And, maybe you'll be using it in 10 years or maybe not. But either way, you just kind of have to do it to get your job done. But my personal preference is to get the best ROI I can on my time in terms of skills that will compound for a long period of time, and then delegate as much of the rest as I can.
That's fascinating. So one of the questions that I found comes up a lot from non-technical founders is, should they learn how to program, right?
Yeah.
And my perspective on that is, well, you're not going to build your app. You're not going to be good enough, fast enough to build your own thing. But at the same time, the skill comes in handy early on to understand how engineers work and how to maybe set them up for success and talk their language. But also in 10 years' time, you're not going to be programming anymore, right? At the same time, we have a bunch of people who are CEOs of small and medium-sized companies or large companies even, who've never seen a line of code. And you can sort of, at least as a product manager, when you have a technical background, you can sort of tell it's like, well, you're just thinking very differently about stuff and you think, let's just put a button there that does X. It can't be that hard, folks. So is there a case to be made for some breadth to be part of sort of the early career stages, so that it makes sense later on?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The way I break down that question is, there are two components to that, right? There's the skill of actually learning how to program, which you will probably forget in 10 years. And then there's the skill of, the more abstract skill, which you will be using in 10 years, which is how to think like a programmer. And you definitely want to optimize for the latter, because that is super long-term, super high leverage. The languages and the frameworks and everything else will change, and you're going to forget all of that. But, the systems thinking aspect and how a programmer actually thinks through a problem is super useful. And a lot of the time, the way you pick up that skill is actually just by going and, learning how to program and accepting the fact that you're going to, forget parts of it. But hopefully with that framework in mind, it helps you maximize the ROI on that. So you're spending more time, you maybe don't try to go learn 3 programming languages. You realize you only really need to learn 1 to get that transferable skill.
Yeah, awesome. And it's interesting when people want to learn how to program, that one of the questions always becomes, well, which programming language should I start with? And they're all sort of similar enough that doesn't matter unless you try something really weird like Scheme, which is just. Did you have to learn Scheme back in the days?
No, but I've done some functional stuff.
It's just a lot of brackets. It's just very unnatural.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, next question from the audience, from Jess. What skills do you want to learn next, and why? And I think we've seen your board with all this stuff. I'm actually curious to add a question on top, which is how you prioritize sort of within. What's next?
So that board is pretty much untouched now. I've kind of I guess abandoned that approach a little bit, just because I found myself, I guess most of the things that I had on there were very course based and technical, and if I end up in a place where I need to learn one of those things, I'll definitely go back to it. But I think for me, it's probably there's a bit of a tangent, but I've gone fairly deep into the kind of blockchain space, and a lot of interesting things there around how people are working in a very decentralized, asynchronous fashion, and I think that's where I'm focusing a lot of my time now, just kind of understanding the space, the possibilities, what's real, what's not, and I guess there's a mix there of new ways of working and new ways of working with people and managing people, and separately to that, a lot of actual technical stuff, which I do think is long term in terms of the whole mental model of how a lot of these systems work.
Awesome. Okay, so that interestingly funnels sort of into the next question from Vlad. Thanks, by the way, Jess. So Vlad's interested in how the PM space is changing, and if you can think of any PM skills that are very relevant right now that weren't so important in the last couple of years. Is it crypto and blockchain, or is there other things you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, crypto is probably that's probably very domain specific. I think a lot of it actually depends on region, right? Like, so if you think about like PM in Australia, it's quite different to PM in the US, and the general, I guess expectations and roles tend to vary quite a lot, even within companies actually. So depending on your region, for example, in Australia, I think there's probably more a trend towards the US level of ownership and responsibility, and I think a bit of a gap which I often see is I guess more of the strategic thinking piece and more of a commercial and business lens to it. Whereas actually I'm probably not familiar enough with the scene in the US to comment, but I guess that'd be my take based on the Australian scene.
Yeah, interesting. I actually agree with that. I think I had a few conversations recently where that shift from product as execution function to product as strategy function is really starting now, and that real transformation is sort of happening. I also heard new terms recently that digital transformations are pretty much done. The next thing is going to be product transformations.
Yeah, right.
And actually, proper, especially with large companies and I suppose sort of financial organizations where it's still very business driven and product is just execution. That strategic mindset and skill set and how to leverage it and how to embed it into the organization skill and processes is becoming more relevant. We'll see what happens. Obviously, we've got front row seats to that show. Okay, so we're almost at 7 here. If anyone has any more questions, drop them in the channel, but otherwise we might wrap it up soon. I have one more, and that's related to your last slide. So problem-solving skills for product managers, super important, right? Especially starting with the thinking that let's solve problems and not let's implement solutions. I know we always have a bunch of people looking to get into product management at the events. So when you hire product people, other than problem solving, what other skills do you look for and that you think are sort of generally important, no matter which organization you're at?
That's a good question. I think my general approach to hiring is the best employees are the ones you don't have to manage. So basically, people who will go off and do a better job than you would have with whatever partial information you're able to give them, right? And there's two aspects to that. There's picking the right people, and then the second bit is kind of coaching them to get to that point. And I think the skills which I'd look for are basically they're quite abstract, but they're basically things around being able to work through ambiguity, being able to take ownership of their work and deliver results on their own, like highly autonomous, being able to go away, gather whatever necessary information they need, build relationships with the right people, but all, I guess, the overarching theme being if I give you half a problem and a half-baked idea, are you able to go away and on your own come back with like an amazing solution to it?
Interesting. Did you find as well that you can find that sort of those traits are almost independent of experience as product manager?
They're almost entirely behavioral. It's super interesting. Like, I think when companies get big enough, I saw this at Amazon, they tend to hire for the company, not for the role. And so, the interview process for Amazon is almost entirely behavioral. It's basically seeing, do you have these qualitative traits? And if you do, cool. We will put you in almost any role. I've seen people move from like finance to product, from product to marketing, from engineering to, sales. People just move everywhere because, some of them obviously have some technical skills, but for the most part, if you've got people who can think and operate the right way and can pick up, the baseline level of knowledge that they need to operate in a role, then that's actually the 80% of what you need.
Yeah. It's the old hire for attitude, not aptitude.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love seeing that come to life. I've had junior PMs who did, because of those traits and that behavior, did a much better job than people who were just super experienced. And it's so interesting. Whenever I read product JDs, I think mine look a little bit different to maybe the rest of the market, but I always see three things, right? One is you need to have technical experience because, well, you're going to work with engineers, and we don't want you to like the engineers to bullshit you. And so clearly, what's absolutely required there is technical experience. And then, of course, industry experience and just number of years of experience. As if I think when I came to Sydney in 2014, pretty much every product JD I could find always said we need a senior PM with 5 years experience. And there was nothing else out there. And it's like they don't product managers don't grow on trees with 5 years experience. I think that's changing now, but yeah. Okay, awesome. One last question from Clint, which is, will we get access to the slides? Well, Clint, I'll do you one better. This recording will stay live, so you can even get the narrative and everything on the same link that you're on right now, on the YouTube link, and watch it over and over again. So yeah, so that's sorted. Now with that, we will probably wrap it up. Thank you again, Anshul. Thanks for spending the time with us and sharing all the dropping all the bombs of knowledge on us. And I know you're up to really, really awesome adventures. So whichever company is going to snap you up is very, very lucky to have you. So thanks, Anshul. I'll take you off the screen now. And just one last announcement. We'll have another Product Tank event possibly this year, otherwise next year. And again, quick shout out, we're a community. Get involved. Reach out, send me an email. No need to be shy. But also, if you haven't done so, join the Product Tank Sydney group on Meetup, and you'll hear about the next event that we're going to put on as soon as it's live. Thank you all for joining. I hope you have a fantastic evening and apply some of the lessons learned about learning how to learn. Have a good night, and see you next time.